There are definitely some positive aspects of Jesus Revolution, and I will highlight those in a moment, but I also didn't like the film, and I can identify why as well, which is not always the case. So I will, in a little bit, explain why I didn't particularly care for this film. This will be spoiler-free. However, this is based on the book Jesus Revolution, and obviously if you've read the book, you're going to know what happens in this. It is based on true events, and I'm not overly familiar with this time period. I'm not overly familiar with this spiritual awakening at the beginning of the 70s. Had I had more background knowledge, I might have enjoyed the film a little bit more, but I feel like the film is presented as a source of background information. So I don't necessarily feel like that would be the case, but I'm willing to accept that maybe that could have happened. This was released in 2023. It's directed by John Irwin and Brent McCorkle, written by John Gunn and John Irwin. And we have a cast including Joel Courtney, Jonathan Roumie, Kimberly Williams-Paisley, Anna Grace Barlow, and Kelsey Grammer. And Kelsey Grammer is absolutely the reason this came on my radar, and I definitely wouldn't have watched it otherwise. And unfortunately, on this occasion, it's not one of those films where I'm thankful I liked somebody in it because it ended up being a good film for me personally. But I do think that there is an audience for this. And I'll read the description from IMDb, which sums it up without really giving too much away. But as I said, it is based on true events. And this says, the true story of a national spiritual awakening in the early 1970s and its origins within a community of teenage hippies in Southern California. And that did sound like it could appeal to me because I am spiritual. So that aspect of it certainly worked well for me. We do have some brilliant messages in this. And obviously anything that provides a snapshot of a certain period of history is going to be fascinating. I have no idea how accurate this is to true events. So if anybody can provide more information on that, please feel free to do so. As I said, maybe if I had more background knowledge, it might have, in fact, it probably would have been a different experience. But I feel like the film does actually do a pretty decent job of providing the background information. So I don't think that's necessarily a prerequisite to enjoying the film. The good aspects of the film, from my perspective, we have some great music, we have some good camera work, and the performances are not bad at all. However, the reasons I didn't like this are mostly twofold. And the first is that I just didn't care for any of the characters. I just didn't find any of them to be interesting. I didn't find them to be anybody I could connect with or anybody whose journey I particularly cared for. I just found the characters to be really dull. And unfortunately, the narrative itself was tremendously slow. It is actually quite a long film. It's over an hour. I think it's nearly 2 hours. In fact, let me check. Yes, Wikipedia lists it as having a runtime of 120 minutes. I feel like it was just under that, but it's certainly very, very long for this kind of story where there's not a lot of action. There's not a lot of progression in the narrative scene to scene. It is very, very slow and it takes a long time to get anywhere. So while we have some great messages, and we do have some good moments, it's not completely boring all of the way through, but I feel like it is so slow and from one scene to the next, not a great deal happens. It takes a very long time to get anywhere, with a few exceptions. And when we throw in some really dull characters as well, I just found it to be kind of tedious. So I loved the messages. The fact that it's based on true events, I did find quite fascinating. But unfortunately, as a narrative, as a story, I found it to be incredibly dull, with some really boring characters as well. So I genuinely don't know if I recommend this. I feel like if you are particularly interested in this period in history and you want to learn more, this does seem like a good film for that, a good starting point. I now feel like I have a little bit more knowledge than I did going into it. And if you like any of the cast in this, then sure, check it out. I did like Kelsey Grammer's performance. He plays the pastor, Chuck Smith, who is a pretty interesting enough character, but again, not a character I cared for either. So even with Kelsey Grammer playing one of the characters, I still ended up not caring for any of the characters. That's not to say any of the characters are necessarily unlikable. And as I said, the performances are absolutely fine. I just didn't find any of the characters interesting. And then to couple that with a very, very slow narrative, for me personally, it just wasn't very engaging. As I said, there are some good bits, the performances are fine, the music is good, but beyond that, for me personally, Jesus Revolution didn't really have a lot to offer. If it sounds like your kind of film, check it out. You might like it more than I did. I don't mind having watched it. I feel like I got a little bit of an education about this time in the 70s, but other than that, I didn't really love it, and I don't recommend it for everybody. But if it appeals to you, check it out. For me personally, I certainly won't be watching it a second time.